Can feel my body cold against the concrete, but I can't seem to get enough. My mind is fixed on what it wants. I just let you beat me. Looks can be deceiving. Let you get the best of me. I'm bad with my worst enemy. This is a no-go. I just can't take hold. This is a danger zone. Back up and get me home. This is a no-go. I just can't take hold. This is a danger zone. Back up and get me. So put your hand in mine. Follow me. Let me waste your time. Set up feet. Do some stupid shit. Take a seat. Let me waste your time. Slow beats up a tower.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Warrior's Den. I'm Nick Pellavita. I'll be one of your participants in today's presentation. And today we're going to look at a really pretty exciting case that just came out. And this deals with something which is Venezuelans being deported. Now, normally this would not be very exciting, except Judge Bosenberg determined while the flight was in progress to have an order from the bench. And what he did was have a oral order to turn those planes around and send them back. In other words, he granted a restraining order for the American Civil Liberties Union and didn't like the idea that these people were being deported. And of course, what happened was, and this is the part that made it exciting, in this case, Donald Trump and the administration decided not to turn the planes back. Instead, they proceeded on to El Salvador. So the Venezuelans were deported to El Salvador. And they made such interesting arguments saying, well, this is beyond the jurisdiction of Judge Bosenberg because they were over international waters at the time. The other interesting legal argument, they said that Trump had the ability to do this under the Alien Enemies Act of 1798. Now, everybody remembers that act. No, they don't, because it was a long, long time ago. So the allegations were that these people were members of a gang called Tren de Agarra. And so hence the thing is they said that, you had the right to deport them because they're basically at war with the United States of America, although there was no formal declaration of war. Well, this really upset the judge, and not because the thing is, and so he was going to order sanctions, but it also upset Donald Trump, who said that they need to impeach Judge Bosenberg. And then, of course, now you have Justice Roberts, who weighed in and said, there's no impeachment. You can't impeach a judge just because you disagreed with his decision. So here we have it in the reign of Henry VIII, except we don't have Henry VIII. We have Donald Trump creating more interesting stuff that only the Lawyer's Den can cover it. With that, we have Peter Bennett, who has studied this thing intimately and can see the problem on this. So, Peter, give us your little viewpoint on what happened, where we are. By the way, this is a drama in progress. It's not over till it's over.
No, nothing's over till it's over. That's true. So I'll start with the background, as I always do, and then we'll get into legal arguments. Hours after Donald Trump invoked a wartime law to target terrorist organization, if I could say it right, Tren de Aragua, TDA, we're going to call it, Saturday, a federal judge ruled the law could not be used to deport 5 Venezuelans and ordered the plane to return to the U.S. The Aliens Act, Enemies Act of 1798, which allows deportation of natives and citizens of an enemy nation without a hearing, has been invoked 3 times previously during the War of 1812, World War I, and World War II. So it has been used several times. This is not new. All Venezuelan citizens 14 or older who are members of TDA are within the U.S. and are not naturalized or lawful permanent residents of the U.S. may now be apprehended under this what Trump invoked, may be apprehended, restrained, secured, and removed as alien enemies. So that's the general background. And I guess I'll throw this in too. So here's the other side of it. Before we get into, politics and what Robert said and everything else. So a group of Republican state attorneys have already filed an amicus brief in the U.S. Appeals Court, and that was on Tuesday afternoon, urging the circuit court to reverse the judge's order. And the documents were led by South Carolina and Virginia Attorney General Alan Wilson and Jason Mayaris. And here's what they said. When a judge unilaterally steps in and does a temporary restraining order on a nationwide injunction, basically that prohibits the president from performing the one function that the states really can't do themselves, that undermines our ability to better protect our citizens. They also said Trump acted fully within his constitutional and statutory authority when he did not ground the airplane departing the migrant gang members. So to get into it, the heart of the matter, in terms of my opinions, first of all, in the last few weeks, we've discussed things where Trump and in the administration pushed the envelope when we caught them where they could have done things procedurally more correctly. And they really, they could have done the same things in better ways. In other words, he could have signed the order from Musk, and later he had to have, after our show, he did have his cabinet members sign those orders. As an example of our first show, and the other shows too, there were procedural issues that could have been solved easily. But in this case, it's the president who is in charge of national security, and it's the president is in charge of foreign affairs. Meanwhile, this is a local district judge, and the big problem with this is the following. There are local district judges all over the country, and anybody can take a case to one that they think will rule favorably. And is that person going to be able to, dictate national affairs or dictate anything for that matter? At some point, there has to be a limit on and some judicial restraint in terms of realizing that they're overstepping their power. It's not just politics, and it's not just protecting immigrants. In general, let's say, and then I'll hand it over to Nick for some more comments, but let's say people did this to Biden constantly, and they did to him to a point, but they won a lot of those on appeal, by the way, too. But the point is, nothing will ever get done or very little will ever get done in the future if district judges can constantly interfere with Congress or the president. And, we're not a judiciary-run country. So, Nick, what do you think?
Well, I mean, the thing is, this is what we're going to see a lot of, I think, in this in the upcoming months, Peter. Is
Sure.
To what extent do the executive branch have power, and what extent does the judicial branch have power? But let's go take a look at Judge Bosenberg just for a little while. According to, upon information and belief, that he was nominated by Bush. He's a solid Republican, and it was approved 96-0 in the Senate. So even though Trump made him like he's this left-wing judge, apparently he's not. So the thing is, when
I have to say one thing. I thought I heard that he was appointed by Obama.
No, I mean, again, like I said, information belief. And unfortunately, since I get my data off the internet, as we well know, you have to fact check everything several times to make sure. And this is the information I got. So whether or not this is true or not, it's just like anything. You got to re-fact check this. But interesting this. Here's some of the arguments. He ordered the flights to return, but he did by an oral order. In other words, he didn't have a written order. And from the bench. So he's making an order from the bench. Some of their arguments were kind of interesting because what they said is that he didn't have jurisdiction. In other words, and this is a really good question. Does a federal district judge have jurisdiction over a flight, an American flight over the Atlantic Ocean or in international waters? Right. In other words, can he just blurt out an order? And the reason why this is important, as we well know, that a lot of casinos and cruise lines, they go offshore, and then all of a sudden they're not faced with the jurisdiction of the United States, and they can go ahead and gamble and they can do what they want because they're outside the territorial jurisdiction of the U.S. So this was, to me, was one very interesting argument that took place. But obviously, it's been the other thing is, of course, this act. The Alien Enemies Act of 1798 says during times of war And really, it's a stretch. Are we really at war with Venezuela? Well, technically not. So the thing is, could he even invoke the Alien Enemies Act of 1798? Hasn't been used very often. He's making a claim that he can. So that also becomes becomes very interesting. Then the impeachment. At first, I thought people were talking about having Trump impeached, because let's say that Trump did just blatantly violate a court order. What's the remedy? As you know, in law, it's like, okay, you have a breaking of the law, and you got to look at remedies. What is the remedy? And so when they said impeachment, and when Justice Roberts said no impeachment, I was going, is that for Trump? But no, it wasn't. It was actually for Judge Rosenberg, because Trump was asking for the judge to be impeached.
Right, exactly.
So this becomes quite a very interesting thing. So let's say that he did violate the court order. Okay, what can the judge do? Because remember, in the famous case with the Trail of Tears in Oklahoma, when they removed all the Native Americans to Oklahoma, that case actually reached the Supreme Court of the United States. And the Supreme Court said that was illegal, Andrew Jackson. You can't remove these Native Americans and go to Oklahoma. Okay, President Jackson's response was, and I'll never forget this, okay, you made your order, now enforce it. Right. And notice that the court couldn't do anything. They had no enforcement powers. So what happened is, frankly, nothing. And so Oklahoma became Indian territory. Now, let's say that he did violate the law. Let's say that it was clear he violated the law. What remedies does the judge have over the executive branch? Can he sanction them? Well, remember, there was this recent case that came out that the president is immune from official acts.
Right.
And this may clearly fall under an official act. In other words,
well, clearly it's an official act. There could be no doubt whether or not you agree with his use of the Alien Act, and it's no doubt it's part of his official acts. So you're right, he's immune right now.
Yeah, right. Okay, and so the thing is, we're looking at is this. And this probably won't go into this case, but as Donald Trump butts head against the judicial branch, you're going to see this come up over and over again. I'm just predicting this is going to happen because
of course, it's going to happen constantly.
The question is, what is the remedies by the court? Can he sanction Donald Trump and the administration and make them pay fines?
I don't think so, because of the official acts, right? I mean, I don't think they can do that. And I mean, and impeachment obviously is never going to happen by a Republican Congress. And then again, if the Democrats took over in 2 years, they'd probably impeach him for every single day he's in office, at least, make the effort.
Yeah, but it seems to me that the remedy is actually impeachment, Peter. In other words, the remedy is to recommend that Congress impeaches the president of the United States.
Right, they can certainly do that.
Okay, and Congress can do it or cannot do it. Under the current political situation with both the House and the Senate controlled by the Republicans, this is a practical matter, as they say in Pawn Stars. It ain't happening.
No, not even close. No.
Okay, not even close. So you can't. I think we're going to see this as time goes by. We're going to have situations where the remedies by the court, when Trump challenges and then decides to go ahead and do it his way anyway, the remedies by the court may be limited. In other words, as to actually what they can do against a sitting president because of the immunity of official acts, which was promulgated by the Supreme Court of the United States. I think we're going to see this this year because he's got so many cases flooding in, from this to the executive orders to we have birthright citizenship issues that are going in front of the court. And then the latest one that just came out was he's attempting to repeal Joe Biden's pardons, which is very interesting. Okay, in other words, like the thing is, so
that they were done with an auto pen.
Yeah, right. He's saying that Joe Biden was incompetent when he did it, and hence the pardons are invalid. So we're going to see, I think, in this term, is we're going to see.
this is the most active presidency we've ever seen in history.
I think we're looking at Henry VIII. I don't know if you ever saw all these movies about Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn and the colorful things that Henry did with Thomas Cromwell and with Cardinal Wolsey. In other words, a very colorful figure. And Henry VIII was written about for decades, even today, because the thing is, he was a very colorful figure. We haven't seen somebody this high in office, I think, since Henry VIII.
Well, it's not just his color, but it's not just the color. Here's the point. He is moving at the speed of light in terms of politics. I mean, we have, I don't even know what happened, but supposedly today, 80,000 pages of hidden Kennedy reports are going to be released. But he's moving quicker, partly because he was president, partly because he's a workaholic, which is, I'm not saying that negatively, but, whether you agree or not, he moves and he moves and moves and pushes and pushes. So, and then on the other side, the Democrats right now, and those opposed him, really only have judicial responses because they're not in power. So they're pushing the envelope there too. And every time they can, or they see an opening, they're going to react. So we're going to see just literally billions of dollars, by the way, spent by the federal government defending these lawsuits. But then again, they're trying to cut trillions or whatever. So it's a drop in the bucket in the long run. But this is going to just jam up so many courts too, because in the end, then the Supreme Court's going to be like, which one do we take? Because they're all heading, or most of them are heading, or maybe everyone is heading for the Supreme Court. So I would say, I'll throw in one other point, which is, and I don't think this will pass, but there's an initiative in Congress to limit the power of judges, lower court judges, obviously not the Supreme Court, but other judges, to only the parties who bring actions. So in this case, I don't even know who brought that action to defend the TDA people, but in general, you have to be, according to this initiative in Congress, you have to be party to the actual suit, and the judge cannot go beyond the parties in the suit, which is probably, whether you're a liberal, conservative, Democrat, Republican, a very good thing for the future, because otherwise this is going to jam the wheels of anything, whether you agree with it or not, in the future. Because let's just say in 4 years or 8 years or 20 years, whatever, we now have a Democratic president, maybe a Democratic Senate, Democratic House. What are the Republicans going to be doing? They're going to be bringing every single lawsuit they can. And so suddenly the courts are jammed up, and the wheels of motion, it's just slowing everything down either way. The president gets 4 years, whether, any president, and Congress, some of them get 2 years, and, it's just going to jam things up. But that said, I don't think that they'll be able to pass that law, because they will need a majority. They'll have to break the filibuster, but it would actually be a good idea to do that.
Yeah. Well, this was a case actually brought by the American Civil Liberties Union. The ACLU decided to take upon itself to defend freedom, and in this case, it was freedom of not people who are American citizens, supposed to be the American Civil Liberties Union. Instead, it was people that were purportedly trying to get asylum in the United States. So the ACLU was the one that is behind this asking for the temporary restraining order. And their arguments were these 5 individuals were not people that were anything other than but seeking asylum legitimately. And so they brought that, and the judge accepted it apparently and said, well, since they're just getting asylum, they have the right to stay here. Unfortunately, the planes were in the air. Okay. And so the thing is, and that created the controversy, because really, can you order planes to turn around? I mean,
Right. You mentioned the international waters.
Yeah,
right?
International waters, but even domestically, it's
wait.
They have flight planes and things of that
does
nature.
have jurisdiction over the president, well, to an extent, but I'm just saying, then that's complicated, because yes, the plane is in the air, but on the other side, he can order Trump, who's in Washington or Florida, but probably Washington right now, to order them, because he does have jurisdiction over, the president theoretically, although limited probably. So, it's not just the plane. He can order the party who started the motion to reverse it. But look, the other side is this is insane, and I don't know where the Democratic Party is going. I used to have a show called Wall Street Hackers for many years, and I would all point out that what has happened in the country for a lot of the Democrats, and I predicted that they're probably going to lose the election, and that they're taking too many sides that don't make sense. Whether it's on the transgender theory, on so many issues, on crime particularly. These are not popular issues that they're fighting tooth and nail. And I always blame in the end the media, because let's say you're liberal, and I'm liberal on many issues, but I'm just saying what's happened is the country is divided, and it's by the media. And so some people believe what they see on MSNBC. I believe almost nothing, but I watch it sometimes to see what they're saying. But they're extremists. And then a lot of people think, ABC and NBC are just news, or CNN, but they lean very heavily left on many issues. And so I think that what happens is, let's say you're a liberal, particularly. I'm not saying that negatively. I'm just saying, let's say you're a liberal. You're not going to be watching Fox News or getting information. So what you get is basically what my chemistry teacher used to say is garbage in, garbage out. So on any issue, this is true. You have to, the right way, by the way, is to compare both and see, and follow the trails, and actually to see the original documentation, like the original speeches, and figure out who's telling the truth. But the point is, if you're liberal, you may only be watching MSNBC or CNN or getting all that news, and then you're in a bubble. And then the other people on the other side are in a bubble too, admittedly. And so, but I believe, I'll say, I don't want, this isn't a political show, but I would say overall, I see a lot more truth in Fox News, but I'm not saying they're always right. And I disagree with them plenty, but MSNBC particularly, I see very little truth. They're just attacking Trump 24/7. But the point is, if that's what you watch, and I have friends who do that, and then now they're, if that's what you watch, so really the media is driven by ratings. So, and that's the final point I'll make there is, let's say you're saying, well, we're going to attract a liberal audience. Then you really want to stir them up, and you want to go all out liberal. And if you say something conservative, and this happened to Joe Rogan when he visited Trump, they lost a lot of viewership. It's like, oh no, he visited Trump. So the way to get ratings is either is to pander to your audience, basically. But the problem is that we are in the information age, and people are getting all their information from the media and don't necessarily have time to sift through it. So it's a very divided country. But the point I'm making in the end is the Democrats are really pushing some of these issues, and it's not going to help them either. Look, there's very few people who want terrorists to remain in the United States. So they're kind of eating their own on this issue.
Yeah, and then that's also the problem. So I think what you're looking at is that Donald Trump was looking at the situation from a political standpoint,
absolutely,
not just a legal standpoint. And when you look at a political standpoint, here we have a group of people that are part of a gang in Venezuela, and they're here in the United States. All that is not good.
No, it's not going to be popular with many people.
Not very popular with most Americans today. Right. They just don't want gang members from Venezuela. And let's face it, Peter, these people are guests here. In other words, even though it's almost like, hey, I'm here, so I have all the rights. No, you don't. Okay. You're basically guest here. And the thing is, you can kick your guest out, which is what happened in this particular case. The judge, but this is where you brought up a very important point. A federal district judge has basically jurisdiction all over the United States. So you can have a federal district judge in Alaska who's totally removed from everything in the world, but they create an order, and the order is enforceable all over the country. Where most orders aren't that way, from especially state judges, you have to have the judgment admitted into every state that you go into. So we have a definite jurisdiction problem. Now, it has worked in my favor before in some cases, especially the U.S. Chamber of Commerce versus the Department of Labor, where they went down to Louisiana and got a very favorable ruling from a federal district judge that got rid of the fiduciary rule and got the 11th Circuit to approve it. And then by that time, Trump came into office and he wouldn't appeal it, so we ended up winning. But so there's some gamesmanship that can be played on that.
A lot of gamesmanship. That's what.
Yeah, right. In other words, it's called forum shopping.
Forum shopping. Exactly.
And when it comes to forum shopping, the ACLU may have gone to a judge who apparently doesn't like Trump. Even though he's a Republican.
You would expect they did.
Yeah, in other words, they single out, let's go to a judge who really hates Trump and go get a favorable ruling. And so
or just a judge they knew would, basically, as you said, that's what forum shopping is about. So they went to a judge they knew they were going to win at that level, but now it gets appealed, and we see where it goes. You know what? You raised a really interesting thing, and I do not know the answer to this, but this is a really interesting thing you mentioned. You said that this order was oral and not written?
Yep.
Can you explain to me and the audience, what does that mean? Does anybody have to follow an oral order? I mean, what if they say, I didn't hear it? You know?
Yeah.
It's like he said it,
well, the thing is that they have court reporters and transcripts at court. But the thing is, you can imagine he's on the bench and says, I hereby order the planes to be turned around and reversed. Okay. You know, there's a lot of complication to that, Peter, because like I said, a lot of these planes have flight plans. They have to have approvals. They just can't turn on a dime. So the real question is,
that's a separate issue. But what I want to get into is he said it on the bench, and I don't know how this works. So he said it on the bench, and it went into a court reporter's transcript. Right. Now there are every day, hundreds of thousands, tens of thousands maybe of court transcripts being written. So can Trump just say, when the executives say, well, we didn't get a chance to read the transcript yet because, or they mailed it to us, but we didn't open it yet?
Yeah, but his attorneys were there. Okay. But you're correct. There's also a communication issue, especially when you want to order something immediately. The real question is the judge ultra vires? I mean, did he exceed what his powers are by making orders? In other words, can a judge create an order saying, I'm ordering because I don't like how the construction was done on Congress to tear down Congress. In other words,
No, that's the big issue. But just to delve into this, because I find it really interesting. So the judge put it in the transcript, and Trump's attorneys were there, but Trump's attorneys tried to get a hold of Trump, and they couldn't. He's kind of a busy man, and then so what if Trump says, and the executives say, we didn't even hear from them. They didn't get it. They went back to their offices and called us, and it was like 2 days later before we talked to him. He has other things to do besides waiting to hear from this one trial. Oh wait, tell me what it said in the transcript. It's like, so I don't see where even. I think it's a pretty good defense to say, like, well, I didn't read the transcript, or I didn't, I don't even know how this works really, but at least with a court order, I guess that would be mailed or sent or somehow. How does that work, Nick? Let's say a judge says,
he issued a temporary restraining order orally over the bench, and then later on he put it in writing. And so the thing is, right now they're going back and seeing when the flights took off and when they didn't do it to see if he violated the temporary restraining order.
So my next question is, what if somebody, with judges all over the country ruling on executive actions, now and maybe forever, what if they say, well, he ruled and we didn't open up our mail yet. We have a million things, or we didn't see it. It's like,
Peter, there's a lot of questions that ain't over. But unfortunately, we're over because we're at the half an hour.
We are at
even though this ain't over, we'll see you next week on Lawyer's Den. I'm sure there'll be some more exciting things coming out.
Oh, it's always exciting. Thanks.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
I can feel my body cold against the concrete, but I can't seem to get enough. My mind is fixed on what it wants. I just let you beat me, looks at me deceiving. Let you get the best of me, in bed with my worst enemy. This is a no-go, I just can't take hold. This is a danger zone, back up and get me home. This is a no-go.